over the years, my respect for the big mountains and the jungles and the deserts has grown and grown, and you realize you're really pretty small.
Bear Grylls was the face of real survival on global television. But at the peak of its success, when millions were still tuning in, the show suddenly disappeared. Now, Bear finally spoke out, and the real reason is far more personal and far more shocking than anyone expected. Join us as we uncover why Bear Grylls walked away from the show that made him a legend. The birth of a survival phenomenon. Before Man vs. Wild ever aired, Bear Grylls had already lived a story that sounded impossible. In his early 20s, a parachuting accident in Zambia went very wrong. His chute failed to open correctly, and he hit the ground hard. The impact shattered his back in several places. Doctors warned he might never walk again. Recovery was slow and painful. He went from a hospital bed to careful rehab, one step at a time, rebuilding strength and hope. 18 months after that fall, he did something few people would dare to try, even in perfect health. He joined an expedition to climb Mount Everest. High winds, deep cold, and thin air make Everest a brutal climb. Grylls made it to the top and became at that time the youngest Briton to reach the summit. That moment mattered for more than the record. It defined how he saw himself and what he could push his body and mind to do after injury. This is the personal story that shaped Man vs. Wild. Viewers weren't just watching a TV host. They were watching a man who had rebuilt himself and tested that rebuild on the world's highest mountain. The show would take that spirit, face fear, prepare well, keep moving, and bring it to deserts, jungles, and ice. Many adventure shows are led by polished presenters. Grylls was different. He served with the British Army's 21 SAS, a unit that trains for harsh conditions and tough missions. That background gave him skills that don't come from a studio. Navigation, survival, risk assessment, and the ability to stay calm when things go wrong. He also carried real scars, both physical and emotional, from injury, recovery, and life in the field. On camera, he didn't act like a celebrity. He moved like a guide who had been there before. He spoke plainly. He showed what to do with the gear you have or the materials you can find. He wasn't selling comfort. He was modeling grit. Viewers could sense it. When he drank from a rough water source or built a shelter in a storm, it felt grounded in long practice. The message was simple. Learn the basics, respect the risk, and work with what the wild gives you. When Discovery Channel greenlit Man vs. Wild in 2006, it was reaching for something raw. Nature shows had long focused on animals or scenic beauty. This format puts a human at the center of the struggle to stay alive step by step. It was a gamble. The wild is slow, dangerous, and hard to film. Weather changes, plans fail, safety has to come first. Still, the idea was powerful. Send one skilled survivor into real environments and let him teach and demonstrate. The early episodes showed the bet paying off. Grylls moved through deserts, forests, and ice with a clear plan. He explained how to find water, make fire, build shelter, and signal for help. The camera captured both the how and the why. It was direct, practical, and tense. For Discovery, it proved that audiences would show up for real survival lessons, even when they were messy and risky. For Grylls, it proved that TV could carry a useful message and still keep people on the edge of their seats. Stick around. Next, we'll dig into how that early magic on screen started to change as the stakes and pressure grew. The early magic. From the start, Man vs. Wild aimed to show survival choices that most people would never make unless their life depended on it. One scene that many remember is Grylls squeezing moisture from elephant dung in a hot, dry landscape to fight dehydration. It was uncomfortable to watch, but it taught a real point. In extreme conditions, water can be found in unlikely places, and purifying or filtering it is key when possible. The show walked a tight line between technique and spectacle. The camera often focused on messy, difficult moments, which kept tension high. But the lessons were practical. Make a shelter that blocks wind. Keep a fire small and safe, ration energy, use landmarks, and signal in ways rescuers can see. When he ate grubs or raw fish, it wasn't for shock alone. It was to show that calories matter, and that food in the wild is about function more than taste. The risk was part of the appeal, but the core was always how-to, steps, tools, and judgment. Audiences reacted strongly. Many watched with a mix of awe and disbelief. The stunts looked impossible, yet he broke them down into clear steps. Viewers said they learned the basics of finding water, building shelter, and staying calm. Some found confidence to try camping, hiking, or basic bushcraft. Parents wrote that their kids wanted to practice knots, fire safety, and map reading after watching an episode. Teachers used clips to explain heat loss, dehydration, and navigation. The response also reached professional circles. People in the military and search and rescue communities talked about the show as a way to spark interest in field skills. While no one would replace formal training with TV, the visibility helped. It put survival priorities, air, shelter, water, food, into common language. The show made risk assessment part of everyday talk. Plan the route, know the weather, have a backup, and respect the limits of your body. That mix of excitement and education created a loyal following who tuned in not just for thrills, but to understand decisions under pressure. As ratings grew, the format spread across countries. In the UK, the series aired as Born Survivor. In other regions, it was called Ultimate Survival. Titles changed, but the promise stayed the same. Real environments, real problems, and a guide who would show what to do when comfort disappears. The brand reached homes on every continent, and the show became weekly viewing for families, students, and outdoor fans. Next up, we'll look at how bigger pressure and bigger stunts started to change the feel of the show behind the scenes. The first cracks. When Man vs. Wild became a hit, Discovery Channel saw how much people loved watching Bear Grylls face danger. Every episode drew millions of viewers and massive international attention. That success also changed the tone behind the scenes. The network wanted to keep audiences hooked, and the easiest way to do that was to make everything more extreme. Each new season had to top the one before it with bigger landscapes, deadlier animals, harsher climates, and more daring stunts. This push slowly began to change the purpose of the show. What started as a teaching series about survival skills began to feel like an action event. The focus drifted away from practical techniques toward moments that would shock viewers. Executives wanted close calls, dramatic rescues, and constant movement. The pacing of the show sped up, and the planning became tighter. Grylls still performed real survival tasks, but now those tasks were chosen as much for their excitement value as for their educational worth. The wilderness became a stage, and every challenge needed to feel bigger than the last. Real survival doesn't move at television speed. It's about slow decisions, long waits, and careful judgment. Nature doesn't follow a script. Sometimes nothing happens for hours except walking, searching, and hoping for better weather. But that kind of reality doesn't fill a one-hour episode. To keep ratings high, producers began to streamline and reshape survival into quick, powerful scenes. The audience saw Grylls falling into icy rivers, climbing cliffs, and catching snakes, often within minutes of each other. It made thrilling TV, but it also started to bend the truth of what survival really looks like. There was a constant balance to strike between showing something authentic and keeping viewers entertained. The more the show grew, the harder that balance became. The editing, scheduling, and structure had to fit broadcast expectations. Safety crews had to step in at times to manage risk, and that meant some moments were rehearsed or carefully controlled. These weren't fake, but they were managed, and the line between genuine survival and television survival grew thinner each season. The show was still impressive, but the sense of raw unpredictability that had made it special began to fade. Behind the scenes, Grylls began to feel torn. He was proud of the impact Man vs. Wild had on viewers, but he also knew it was becoming something different from what he first imagined. The weight of expectation was heavy. He wanted honesty. The network wanted entertainment. That conflict would only deepen as the show continued, setting the stage for even bigger tensions ahead. Next, we'll go behind the camera to see how the crew and production process tried to keep the show alive amid growing pressure. The production reality. When people watched Man vs. Wild, it looked like Bear Grylls was completely alone in the wilderness. But behind every shot was a small, highly trained crew that made the show possible. The team was usually fewer than 10 people, each with specific roles. There were camera operators who carried heavy gear across rough terrain, medics ready for emergencies, riggers who handled ropes and safety systems, and sound engineers who kept recording even in wind, rain, or sandstorms. Every person was essential. Filming was physically demanding for everyone. The crew had to follow Grylls through jungles, deserts, glaciers, and mountains while staying out of the camera frame. They carried equipment that could weigh over 40 pounds, often climbing or wading through the same dangerous paths Grylls did. In freezing environments, camera lenses fogged up or froze. In hot regions, batteries overheated and sand clogged equipment. Some nights, the crew slept in the same makeshift shelters as Grylls, eating the same ration packs or whatever simple food they could prepare. It was not glamorous work, but it required endurance and teamwork. Their main goal was to capture Grylls' movements safely and clearly while avoiding interference. That meant hanging off cliffs to get the right shot, crossing rivers with waterproof cameras, and keeping up through thick jungle. The risk was real. Everyone knew that one mistake could lead to injury or worse. Despite all of that, the crew stayed committed because they believed in the purpose of the show, demonstrating how to survive, not just how to entertain. Before Grylls ever set foot on location, weeks of planning went into every episode. Safety and logistics were major priorities. The production team would scout the area first, mapping routes, identifying potential dangers, and checking weather patterns. They would test survival techniques ahead of time to make sure they worked in that environment. In some cases, they even built or prepared certain shelters or tools so Grylls could safely demonstrate them on camera. This careful setup often caused confusion among viewers. Some thought it meant the show was staged or fake. But preparation didn't mean deception. It meant survival. Grylls and his team had to balance realism with safety. Demonstrating survival techniques on camera is dangerous, especially when you repeat shots for filming. Pre-planning helped reduce risk without taking away from the authenticity of what was being shown. When Grylls crossed a river, climbed a rock face, or built a fire, he was doing it for real. The planning only made sure it could be done without serious harm to anyone involved. Bear Grylls has often spoken about how much he trusted and respected his crew. He knew that while his face appeared on screen, their work made it possible. They were his silent safety net, experienced professionals who shared his courage and endurance. During dangerous moments such as crossing a glacial river or rappelling down cliffs, the crew had to stay calm and coordinated. They trained together, learning emergency procedures and signals to handle accidents quickly. Next, we'll see how all this effort came under fire when controversy about the show's authenticity exploded into public view. The controversy erupts. By the late 2000s, Man vs. Wild was one of the most watched shows in the world. But behind the growing fame, a storm was building. Reports began to surface claiming that parts of the show were not as real as they appeared. Several news outlets revealed that during filming, Bear Grylls and his crew sometimes stayed in motels or nearby lodges between scenes, instead of sleeping outdoors every night. Other stories claimed that some of the shelters or traps seen on screen had been pre-built by the production team before Grylls arrived to film. Viewers had believed that every moment on screen showed Grylls surviving alone in dangerous, untouched environments. So, when it was revealed that some of the moments were carefully planned or supported by off-screen help, people felt deceived. The report suggested that the solo survivalist in the wild image wasn't completely accurate. There were also claims that certain rescue scenes or dangerous encounters were arranged for safety reasons or clarity during filming. For a show built entirely on the idea of authenticity and raw survival, these revelations were serious. They hit the reputation of both Grylls and Discovery Channel. The illusion of complete isolation had been broken, and audiences began to wonder what was real and what wasn't. The reaction from fans was immediate and strong. Many felt betrayed. Viewers who had admired Grylls for enduring nature's harshest conditions without help now questioned whether what they saw had been genuine. Online forums, blogs, and news discussions filled with debate. Some accused the show of being fake and dishonest. Others defended it, pointing out that safety precautions were necessary and that the techniques shown were still valuable. For Grylls, the backlash was painful. He had built his image on honesty, courage, and skill. While he never claimed to be alone at all times, the way the show was edited gave that impression. Some survival experts and outdoor professionals joined the criticism, arguing that audiences deserved full transparency about how scenes were filmed. They felt that mixing survival education with stage setups risked confusing people about what real wilderness survival involved. Despite the criticism, many fans continued to support Grylls. They believed the value of the show was in the lessons, not in whether every second was completely raw. Still, the controversy left a mark. The trust between the show and its audience had been shaken, and both Grylls and Discovery had to respond quickly before the situation worsened. Discovery Channel moved fast to limit the damage. The network released public statements explaining that Man vs. Wild was meant to demonstrate survival techniques, not to show a continuous, unaided ordeal. They added disclaimers to new episodes, clarifying that some scenes were set up or repeated for clarity and safety. The network also re-edited certain early episodes to make them more transparent about production assistance. Next, we'll look at how Grylls used this moment to rebuild the show's purpose and bring it closer to what he believed survival should really mean. Grylls' pivot to transparency. After the controversy over staged scenes, Bear Grylls and Discovery Channel had a choice to make: either continue trying to maintain the illusion of pure wilderness isolation or rebuild the show with openness and honesty. Grylls chose the second path. He understood that audiences still valued the lessons in Man vs. Wild, even if some moments were planned or assisted. What people wanted most was to learn how to handle real-life survival situations. So, the show began to change direction. Future episodes focused more on teaching and less on spectacle. Grylls started explaining every step in more detail, showing exactly why each decision mattered. When he built a shelter or crossed a river, he took the time to describe his reasoning, how wind direction affected warmth, how the color of the water could indicate safety, or how to find dry tinder after rain. Instead of racing from one dangerous stunt to another, he began emphasizing technique, planning, and mindset. The visual drama was still there. He still faced cliffs, storms, and wildlife, but the storytelling became clearer and more educational. He showed that real survival is about thinking before acting. The change gave the series a new sense of purpose. Viewers who once watched for excitement now also watched to learn. The show was no longer about showing off toughness. It was about passing on skills and wisdom that could save lives. Grylls also faced his critics directly. He didn't hide from the backlash. In interviews and public appearances, he explained that the goal of Man vs. Wild had never been to fool anyone. It was always about teaching practical survival techniques in a way that could be shown safely on television. He made it clear that certain parts of the production had to be managed for health and legal reasons, but the lessons themselves were real. He emphasized that every demonstration was based on genuine methods that worked in real wilderness conditions. The team's preparation was about safety, not deception. Grylls wanted to rebuild trust by reminding audiences of what the show stood for: education, courage, and respect for nature. He said many times that his goal wasn't to make people believe he was superhuman, but to show that survival depends on knowledge and persistence. This openness helped calm some of the criticism. Fans began to see the effort it took to make the show and appreciated that safety didn't mean inauthenticity. Even some of the harshest critics admitted that Man vs. Wild still encouraged people to explore the outdoors more responsibly. Still, the controversy took a personal toll on Grylls. For years, he had risked his safety and worked tirelessly to bring the wilderness to television. Hearing people question his honesty was painful. He had always seen himself as someone trying to inspire and educate. Now he was being accused of exaggeration. That hurt deeply, because authenticity was the core of who he was. Behind the camera, Grylls often spoke about the challenge of keeping the show true to its message while meeting network demands. He wanted control over how the story was told. He believed that survival wasn't about drama, it was about truth. But television required editing, timing, and storytelling that sometimes clashed with his values. The struggle between maintaining authenticity and meeting production expectations stayed with him for years. Next, we'll see how, even with this new direction, the pressure from Fame and the network kept building, leading to an even deeper conflict. Fame's trap. By the time Man vs. Wild entered its later seasons, it had grown into something far bigger than anyone expected. The show wasn't just a TV hit, it had become a global brand. Bear Grylls' name was everywhere. There were books, survival gear, clothing lines, and video games all carrying his image. His books, like Born Survivor and Living Wild, became bestsellers, and his motivational talks drew huge crowds. Children and adults around the world looked up to him as the man who made survival feel possible for everyone. For Discovery Channel, this level of success was a dream come true. They saw Man vs. Wild not only as a hit series, but also as a franchise that could last for years. The network wanted to build on its popularity with spin-offs, holiday specials, tie-in shows, and new formats featuring Grylls. Executives began pushing for more episodes, more partnerships, and more promotional content. The show had turned into a business empire, one that generated massive profits and international recognition. But for Grylls, this success also brought pressure. He was proud of the impact the show had made, but the growth came with strict contracts, busy schedules, and little time to rest. What had started as a passion for teaching survival and adventure had slowly become a machine that needed to keep running. Every year meant new commitments, new locations, and new deadlines. The network wanted to expand the formula that worked, but Grylls began to see that the formula was becoming a cage. After years of filming across jungles, mountains, deserts, and frozen landscapes, Grylls began to feel worn out. The physical and mental demands of the show were enormous. Each shoot meant weeks of preparation, long days in dangerous conditions, and constant travel. What used to feel exciting began to feel repetitive. The episodes followed a familiar rhythm: arrive, assess, survive, and escape. And the creative spark that once drove him started to fade. Grylls had ideas for new ways to tell stories about the wild. He wanted to bring in other survivalists, to focus more on education, and to create interactive experiences for audiences. But Discovery's focus was on maintaining what worked. The network's executives saw consistency as success, while Grylls saw it as stagnation. He wanted to evolve, but the contracts and expectations tied him to the same structure year after year. He often spoke about how Fame could be exhausting. The attention was flattering, but it left little room for privacy or change. Everywhere he went, people expected the same Bear Grylls from Man vs. Wild, fearless, unstoppable, and always performing. Behind that image was a man who wanted to grow, take creative risks, and spend more time with his family. The hardest part for Grylls wasn't the danger or the long shoots. It was feeling like he was losing the freedom that had made him who he was. In interviews years later, he admitted that the show's structure started to feel restrictive. "I wasn't surviving anymore," he said. "I was performing." That statement captured exactly how far things had drifted from his original vision. Still, he stayed committed to giving his best on screen. He continued to push himself physically and mentally for the sake of the audience. But inside, he knew something had to change. The survival expert who once thrived on escaping traps was now caught in one of his own: fame, contracts, and expectations. Next, we'll see how this growing tension led straight into the conflict that finally ended his partnership with Discovery Channel. The breaking point. By the time talks for Season 8 began, Man vs. Wild was a global hit and a powerful brand. That success shaped the tone of negotiations. Discovery wanted to lock in more control over Bear Grylls and the show's future. The proposed deal, according to people close to the process at the time, centered on long-term exclusivity and tight limits on what Grylls could create outside the series. It wasn't just about filming more episodes. It was about owning the path forward: spin-offs, specials, formats, and rights tied to his name and survival style. Multi-year exclusivity meant Grylls would be committed to Discovery first, even if he had new ideas that didn't fit the Man vs. Wild mold. Future rights control meant the network could shape or delay projects he wanted to try elsewhere. These kinds of clauses are common in big TV deals, but here they cut to the heart of the tension that had been building for years. Who decides what survival on TV should look like? The explorer who lives it, or the company that broadcasts it? The pressure was intense. With a hit this big, teams on both sides knew there were millions of dollars at stake. not to mention a global audience waiting for more. But the terms also raised old fears for Grylls. He had already felt boxed in by repetition and spectacle. Locking in those conditions for years ahead felt like freezing his creative life in place. Grylls pushed back. He didn't reject the show or the audience. He rejected the idea of signing away the freedom to grow. He wanted room to develop new formats, to bring in different guests, to experiment with interactive storytelling, and to put education ahead of constant escalation. The proposed deal made that hard, if not impossible. Saying no came with a clear cost. Turning down exclusivity and future rights control meant walking away from guaranteed money, global exposure, and a stable home for the series. But for Grylls, the choice was about principle. He believed that survival, on screen and in life, depends on adapting, not repeating. If the contract locked him into a formula he no longer believed in, then the show would no longer be honest. He would rather take the risk of starting fresh than keep performing a version of himself that didn't feel true. This moment wasn't a stunt. It was a line in the sand. He chose to protect his voice, his ideas, and the mission that brought him to TV in the first place, to teach people useful skills and show real judgment under pressure. Negotiations collapsed. Discovery made the decision to end the relationship. There was no farewell special, no send-off episode, and no victory lap for one of the network's biggest stars. The show went quiet and fans were left to guess what had happened. Publicly, there was a brief, careful confirmation that the partnership was over. Privately, it felt like a legal and creative standoff, two sides that no longer agreed on what the future should look like. The silence upset viewers. After years of following Grylls across deserts, jungles, and ice, they expected closure. Instead, the end felt sudden and cold. Inside the industry, people understood what the fight had been about: control, ownership, and direction. But for the audience, it was a shock. One week, the show was part of their lives. The next, it was gone. What looked like a cancellation was, for Grylls, a decision to keep his work honest. He gave up security to save authenticity, and that choice set up everything he would do next. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more untold stories.